Good morning and welcome to our behavioral community of practice. Thank you all for joining us today. Today we're going to be discussing ODRs, Office Discipline Referrals. I'm Wendy Hardwick. I'm an MTSS specialist with the SPDEG grant at the OSDE, but I'm happy to be able to introduce Dr. Sarah Rich, who serves as a clinical assistant professor for the OSU/CHS Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. Dr. Rich graduated from OSU's School of Psychology program after completing an internship at, can you give me the name? I don't want to mispronounce it.
Devereaux.
Devereaux Center for Effective Schools in Pennsylvania. Dr. Richard provides trainings to teachers and school staff on effective classroom management strategies and consults with schools to develop behavioral intervention plans for students with severe behavioral needs based on functional behavioral assessment data. Thank you for joining us today. We're happy to hear from you.
Great. Well, I will share a screen here. I appreciate that introduction. We're going to be talking about one of my favorite things, which is office discipline referrals, which is not most people's favorite things, but hopefully by the end you'll see why I like it. I am very open to questions as we go, so feel free to unmute or put in the chat as we go any questions that you have. Excuse me. So before I get into office discipline referrals or ODRs, as you might hear me say throughout, I wanted to give a little background on some of the information on how I think about these interventions and things in schools. And so when we are addressing either classroom issues, school-wide issues, or even individual student issues, I tend to think about what can we do to prevent the problem? What are things that we can do to make this problem so it doesn't even occur again? And then what skills is this child missing to teach them some appropriate behaviors, or what skills do we want our whole classroom to use? And how do we teach those? And then how do we make sure we're reinforcing the behaviors we want to see? And then how do we appropriately respond to the behaviors we don't want to see? So we're really going to be focusing on this response side, but we'll kind of pull in some prevent, teach, reinforce as well as we talk about this. So just to give you a kind of concrete example of what I mean by prevent, teach, reinforce, respond, prevention things in the classroom would be I'm walking around, I'm actively supervising my students, I'm have a good classroom arrangement to make sure that we don't have the chatty kids next to each other, and that we don't have all that we've got good routines and practices, that we're setting clear expectations. Teaching are those things like, let's teach how to raise our hand when we need to go to the bathroom. Let's give prompts to line up. Let's talk about when you come into class, you need to have your Chromebook open to this specific things, and teaching those. And then reinforcing, giving lots of behavior specific praise about this is what I like to see. Thank you for doing this. Hey, as a whole class, we all completed our assignments on time, so we get to do this fun thing. Those are sort of those reinforcements. And then response. So this is kind of the bread and butter of the office discipline referrals, especially when we're talking about our school-wide practices, and they work best when we have school-wide practices. So having a corrective consequence flow chart, having some sort of discipline hierarchy, so we all kind of know this is step one, this is step two, and using good redirections, warnings, de-escalations as they come up. So with that, we're going to talk about responding to behaviors, and kind of some restorative and consistent discipline practices that go along with an office discipline referral. So in your classrooms or in your schools, if you've ever thought, why are my consequences not working? A lot of times that is because we're not doing things consistently, or we're not all on the same page. So one of the things, and we won't necessarily do this activity right now, but I'll kind of share how it typically goes. And please speak up of your own experiences with this. But when I'm doing this with schools, I'll have like a stoplight. Red light means this is definitely a practice that someone in the administration needs to handle. Green light is, you know what, that's something that kind of would I'd let slip and I wouldn't even care about in my classroom. And a yellow light's like, I would handle that in my classroom, but I don't need to send that to an administrator. So if we think about like chewing gum, think about classes and chewing gum. How many of your colleagues do you know would send chewing gum straight to the office? How many would ignore it? How many would handle it in the classroom? You probably could think of one for each particular situation, right? You may be an ignore, you may be address it, you may be that is my go-to. I'm always going to send that to the office. The problem with that is that students kind of figure that out, right? They're like, oh, this student, this teacher lets me do this one doesn't. Or they get confused and they're like, well, this teacher did it. Why can't I do it in here? We think of even disrespect. Some teachers will let students talk to them in a specific way, and that's okay in their classroom. Others, that's straight to the principal or the administrator. And so this is why a lot of times consequences don't work, because we're inconsistent across grades, across teachers and staff members. So we want to have consistent responses, and we want to respond proactively when behaviors do occur. So kind of taking another step back, if you have seen the OKMTSS model, which I'm hoping all of you have seen at this point, there's the part that says evidence-based practices, and there's like tier 1 for behavior. Well, the next step to that is really kind of a call out that says when we're doing universal practices, we're trying to prevent, teach, reinforce, and respond. And this here in that response is we're going to respond proactively to behaviors, and we're going to implement consistent restorative and discipline practices. So talking about responding proactively to behaviors and what that might look like. So thinking about that consistency. Believe it or not, consistency starts with your discipline referral. Okay? Because the process for discipline referrals and actually writing that down is going to make it so every teacher is entering the same information and looking at the same things when they're documenting those referrals. And as a school, you should be determining what are the things that are classroom managed versus what are the things that are administrator managed. And so that process of coming up with a consistent discipline referral actually helps with the consistency of responding to misbehaviors. This is something that I think a lot of teachers and administrators tend to think, well, I gave them a referral, so that was the punishment. So many kids that I know don't care if they got a piece of paper, or sometimes they don't even know if they got an official referral and what that looks like. For us as staff members, that discipline referral, it's about documented guidance for the teams of what they should be documenting and what should be on there. And it's about consistency. And truly, what an office discipline referral is it's a data collection process. It is a way to look at, do we have patterns of what of these behaviors that are occurring across locations, times, particular students, types of behaviors, and then we can use that for problem solving. So just challenge you to, if you've ever thought of a referral as the actual punishment or consequence, it's not. It is data collection and documentation. Just some kind of nomenclature terminology. If you've ever done like a formal PBIS training, even years ago, we called this majors versus minors. So minor behaviors were things that we expected classroom teachers or staff to handle. And majors were things that we expected office or administrator to handle. This has been changed in the terminology now. Sometimes you see classroom managed versus office managed. It's really up to your school and what makes the most sense and how you want to document that. So you can either call it classroom managed or staff managed, admin managed, office managed, or stick with that majors versus minors. And just so you know, some of the documentation will have both of those on there that I'm going to show you. So this is what I mean when I talk about that the process comes up as in like for that consistency, because in order to develop our office discipline referral so that it's really useful, we need to come up with some consistent definitions of what are the things that are classroom managed and what are the things that should be office or administrator managed. So this is an example of sort of classroom managed behaviors that your school might come up with. Inappropriate language, and that means profanity of other inappropriate comment directed at a student, teacher, or staff member. So this school is saying that's inappropriate. We expect a teacher to handle it. Physical contact. This isn't fighting. This isn't aggression. This is a student making an unwanted, non-accidental, like touching, bumping, physical contact with another student, but it doesn't cause physical injury to that student. Defiance, disrespect, purposeful, non-compliant of refusal to follow instructions or routines that temporarily distract students from learning. It could be negative, oppositional, disrespectful language that interrupts instruction. These are example definitions. This is going to look different in every school and every grade level. You could see how physical contact at like an early childhood center, that definition is probably going to look different than physical contact at a high school, right? And so this is where when you're making those office discipline referrals, it can help to put out some examples for your staff to look at and kind of go over and say, does this definition make sense for what you're seeing? Would you handle this in the classroom? Would this be something you send to administrator and get the administrator's input of, do I want to see this in my classroom or not? So same thing here of now we're talking about more office managed behaviors or administrator managed behaviors. So this isn't just inappropriate language, it's abusive language, right? So more religious or ethnic slurs, derogatory language, really directed at another. Fighting. So more than just physical contact, two students actually fighting, or physical aggression, one student making serious physical contact upon another student with intent to harm. So these are different, and you can see more serious behaviors that we might want an administrator involved in. Any questions up to that point or thoughts on kind of this differences? And I'm curious if you guys want to put in the chat, any of your schools have very clear definitions of classroom versus administrator, or you can unmute too. I see some typing going on, so I'll give you guys just a second. Carrie, if you are talking to us, you're muted. But I don't know if you're talking to us. And as you guys are typing, I will also say I always encourage schools, if you are at the beginning of this process, to pull up your staff or your student handbook and see what the board has already said are things that have to be managed by the administrator, because you want to make sure that your whatever you're coming up with is consistent. Yeah, and I see kind of, I know we do have levels of behaviors, not sure if it's labeled classroom or out. And that's usually what happens is in those board approved, it'll say like a level 1 offense, a level 2, a level 3, that kind of thing. And so that's a good starting place. And then also know that if you're making anything that would not be consistent with that, it might need to be board approved. Other things to consider when you are starting to do your discipline referrals is making sure you're documenting enough data that you can use it for problem solving. So that means it sounds simple, but we've got student and teacher identifying information. Who's the teacher that referred? Who's the homeroom teacher? And so that can help us determine, hey, is this one teacher referring a lot of students? Maybe that teacher needs some extra assistance. Time and location. Are a lot of our behaviors happening in the lunchroom? Are they happening at dismissal and arrival? When are they happening? And then, of course, the behavior, is it classroom or office managed? One that takes some training for staff to really understand is possible motivation. And so, what I mean by that is getting the staff, they don't have to know the internal motivation of that student, but do we think that what happened after is they got a lot of attention from their peers? Maybe they got out of some assignments. Maybe they got a lot of attention from another teacher. Like, what do we see that might be motivating that behavior? Are others involved, like other peers, other staff members? And then how did the staff respond? If it was office managed, how did the administration respond? Comments, and then parent signature for that piece of it. So this is an example of kind of what an office discipline referral might look like if it's on paper. A lot of times people are doing these in Google Forms or using other processes. If you are looking for a system to do office discipline referrals, I always recommend Swiss, which is from PBIS apps. It's very, very affordable, like $400 per year for the whole district. I will say the biggest concern that schools typically have with office discipline referrals and using any kind of system outside their student management system is sometimes you're having to do double entry for those behaviors that have to be reported on kind of your yearly data. So like for suspensions and those things. But you can't always use the office discipline or the student management systems for problem solving because they don't give you good graphs and they don't give you good information on this. So we do recommend having a separate way to document what's going on sort of a daily basis in the schools. So that's the actual like referral form. And I will put make sure that you guys have access through this community of practice to some examples of those. I forgot to put that in the materials, but I will make sure you have those. The next thing is a good flow chart. So this is kind of the thing that the staff comes up with to make sure that we're doing consistent discipline procedures. So when it is a minor or a classroom manage, what is the teacher supposed to do? When it is office manage, what's the teacher supposed to do? And then what's the admin supposed to do? So this is called your restorative discipline flow chart. I've also heard it as a corrective consequence flow chart. So again, kind of terminology, what works best for your school. This is a system that identifies which behaviors, it defines that out, which ones are majors versus minors or classroom versus office, and outlines those steps for the staff to respond. This is again something that I would recommend doing as a team process so that there's consensus from the staff on what do we think good responses are and reasonable for our school setting. So the first part is the teacher sees a disruptive behavior and then they decide, is this a classroom managed thing or is it an office managed? So we check which behavior it is. If this was disruption, then we're going to go through our classroom managed steps. Okay. So step one would be we're going to redirect, increase support, and we're going to praise others. So I see disruption. That means that I'm going to redirect that student and remind them, remember, we stay on task. We're staying on task. We're working on math right now. I might move closer to that student. So again, these are some of those like prevention strategies that we just talked about, but now you're doing them more specifically to this student to prevent the behavior from getting worse. We might consider, did we just ask the student to do something that they can't do? And we need to tell them, just wait right here. After I work with these students, I'll come back and help you. Do we need to make sure we're acknowledging all those around them? Great job staying on task and not being disruptive. You're doing a good job with your math right now, and praise those around and then look at that student. Are you going to stop your disruption? And then if that if nothing happens past that, great. Like we don't even need to document that. That's just good classroom management strategy, right? But this flow chart reminds our teachers this is what we're supposed to do when we see disruption. If the behavior continues, then we proceed to step two, which is a warning. Give a verbal warning stating you need to stop being disruptive and get back on task. If you don't do that, then this is what's going to happen. If the behavior then continues, then we move to step three. At step three, this is when we say we're delivering those classroom management strategies and that teacher administers a consequence. It might be a conference, it might be contact home, loss of privilege, some sort of restitution, sent to buddy classroom, whatever it is in your school that you've determined are good strategies for addressing this. At this point, if we've gotten to step three, then that's when we document it. Right? So minor disruption that addresses we didn't have to move to any kind of consequence. We don't need to document that. We're documenting the things that are requiring the teacher to take an extra step and implement a consequence. So then we complete this ODR form. If this is a student who keeps having the same behavior over and over, however your school defines that, this school defined it as the same behavior occurs 3 times in 1 week, then we will also say, you know what, this is a continuous behavior. The consequences the teacher has implemented are not working. Now it elevates to an administrator or an office managed behavior, and we send it to the office. Some schools literally in the paper pencil days just like staple those 3 office referrals to a new one and send it to the administrator. Sometimes it's whatever your system is that at that point we're just filling out a new referral and saying this has been a repeat behavior, however that works for your school. But basically this is now become a major or this has now become an office managed thing. Okay. So takeaway on this is we're going to be consistent. And if the students know every single staff member will respond to inappropriate language, late missing work, low intensity behavior with these steps, they're going to recognize very quickly I can't mess around. And if I keep messing around, I'm going to get eventually these consequences. And if those consequences don't work, we're going to have to go to the office. Right. So they're going to recognize that pattern, all those repeat behaviors. Question 2, am I feeding the fire? Sometimes we're feeding the fire, right? Sometimes we don't, those responses don't go the way that we want them to. Sometimes the student keeps escalating. And so we have to move to more de-escalation techniques. And this is strategically responding to that student's problematic behavior and helping them regulate and get to a calm level. I always say when we're de-escalating, I lower my voice a little bit. I try to take like a business-like tone, be very brief in responses, and not try to have too much talking. Like it's very quick, respectful. We're not shaming. It's just redirecting, trying to get them back to a calm state. Um, I'm gonna see if this works to play. I forgot to check this because I was having internet issues today. So I'm gonna stop sharing and open this back up if it will work. Okay. Oh, okay. It is, looks like that video is not available. So I will just describe it to you and you guys go find it for yourselves because it's a great video and it's great to show staff if you're talking to them about this. So there is a video from the movie Shrek where he is riding in on his birthday party and he is in like coming on the birthday party. You can tell he's just getting annoyed by every little thing going on. And then he gets to the birthday party and they keep telling him like, do the war and everything. There's so much noise around him. And you can see all these little things are starting to get to him, but no one's noticing. And all of a sudden he blows up. He does his roar, his classic Shrek roar, and everyone's like, yay, you did your roar. And then he smashes the cake and it is just this like he's devastated and his wife Fiona comes in and is just like, why did you have this big explosive reaction? Because she didn't see all the things leading up to it. And that so often with our kids, we see that peak, we see that big explosive reaction, and we've missed all of these little things kind of leading up to it in the acceleration. And so I put this on here again, talking about office discipline referrals, because a lot of times when we're giving those major office discipline referrals or the office manage, we're just seeing the acceleration and peak, but there was really a lot that led up to it. And so sometimes it's just a behavior out of the blue, like that happens. But a lot of times there's something that's led up to it. And so I encourage you that when you are having a lot of class or office managed behaviors, or you're seeing one student with a lot of those, let's take a step back and see what are maybe some of those triggers and agitations leading up to that that we've missed so that we can go back and try to reduce this back down and prevent. And so it's not about punishment at that point, it's about problem solving and what about this student did we miss in that picture there. So when we're talking about office managed behaviors, one of the first things we need to make sure is that everyone's safe. Sometimes the behaviors are not unsafe behaviors. They're things that aren't necessarily causing safety concerns. But if there are safety concerns, we need to make sure everyone's safe. That individual's safe, others are safe. This again is a school level decision. Some schools say we might need to evacuate the area, evacuate others to keep everyone safe. It can happen because we can't always move the person that's being unsafe, so we have to move the others. And then we utilize those de-escalation techniques. We move slowly, we minimize body language, we get down on their level, speaking very respectfully. If the child starts to escalate, we step back and trying to speak privately and calmly to that student as much as we can, keeping a reasonable distance, eye level, acknowledge whenever there's even little bits of cooperation. So again, this is something that as your staff is developing, they'll probably need training on how to do these things and going over those de-escalation techniques. Once we're de-escalated, or if it's hasn't been an unsafe thing then, and we know everyone's safe, we move to this completing the office discipline referral. If the staff has done anything to respond, they would fill that out. And then the administrative person would fill out what they do. Once it's sent to the administration, then we escort the student, however we get them to the office. We don't avoid a lot of conversation with them when they're going. Then the administrator delivers whatever consequences they're able to administrator, whether that's conferences, contact, loss of privilege, suspension, time in office, whatever that is. Step 6 is so often missed. After that, the administrator follows up with the teacher and says, hey, this is what we did to address this. So let's talk about what do we think this addressed this? Is this one of those events that we need to problem solve to ensure it doesn't happen again? What did we tell parents? So the teacher's in the loop of it, because I can't tell you how many times teachers are like, I don't know, I sent them to the office. I don't know what happened. Or I guess they got suspended. They're not here today, the next day, right? So we need to make sure that there's some sort of loop or follow-up process for those teachers to know what that next step was. Additional things to consider is just office discipline referrals. Like I said, it's not the consequence, it's the documentation of the consequence. The administrator will back up the need for documentation in order to keep up with fidelity. And so what I mean by that is, in order to keep consistent, you really have to have an administrator bought in that's going to hold to that documentation and to ensure all teachers are doing things consistently and that they're being consistent in what behaviors go to the office versus what behaviors don't go to the office. There are some logistical things, like I said, if you're using Infinite Campus or Sylogy or some of those other student management systems, talk about, do we want to document things within that system? And if we document in that system, how do we get that data back out for problem solving? And so what do we do with that data and what do we look at? And then making sure you have those consistent definitions for the problematic behaviors. Some other things to consider if you are starting to see those patterns of problematic behaviors from students is, are we doing this because there might be a lagging skill and something we need to teach? Are we, when we're responding, keeping that student's respect and dignity? Or are we yelling across the room, I told you to sit down, why are you not sitting down? That's not helping anyone, right? We need to be as calm as we can be, but we're all human. So if we can't be calm, do we have a buddy? Do we have a process? Do we have someone else that we can call in for help? School-wide consistency is key to these. Differentiation between those classroom and office managed behaviors. And then the other thing, and I'm going to get into this next, is making sure we have a lot of different types of responses that we can use for students, that we have an array of appropriate sort of non-exclusionary consequences. And so that's kind of the next part here, is that non-exclusionary, and what do we do there? So, well, I say next part. First of all, thinking about, does the behavior need to be taught? Have you guys heard of a can't do versus a won't do, or skill versus performance? I've also heard it as like skill versus will. Sometimes we think about this a lot in academics. We're like, well, is it that they really can't do this or they really won't do this? Sometimes with behaviors, it's that way too. And it might be that in this particular classroom, I learned the rules and routines and what I was supposed to do, but that's not generalizing to my next classroom. And so I need to be retaught the rules and routines for this classroom. Right? And so we always kind of assume first, if we're seeing a repeated problematic behavior, that there might be a lagging skill or something that they need to be taught. If they're constantly fighting with peers, is that because they truly don't understand social skills and they need to be working on social skills. Maybe they don't understand the context of what peers are saying and they need some practice on that, right? If they're constantly using profanities, maybe they need to be taught alternative language for when they're upset, right? So there, what is a lagging skill? What's an appropriate replacement skill here? And then pairing that with, do we have enough positive reinforcement in the environment that they're going to want to use that skill? So, yeah, I might have another way to say I'm angry more appropriately, but if I say that, it doesn't get the teacher's attention. And if I say the profanity, it does get the teacher's attention. So I'm going to use the profanity because that's what's getting reinforced, right? With teacher's attention. So that means as teachers and staff members, we need to make sure we're giving them attention for the appropriate behaviors. And we're making that much more huge deal for the appropriate behaviors and minimizing that attention for the inappropriate behaviors as much as possible, if their attention maintained and they like attention from teachers there. I'll stop there for a second. Any questions or thoughts on that? Kind of this idea of skill versus will, can't do, won't do. Not seen a lot there. I think that's just something to kind of always go back and like, what's a potential lagging skill that the student might need to develop? So sometimes it's the ideal behavior, and sometimes it's just a replacement behavior that is like, sure, that's a lot better than saying F you to me. I'll take that, whatever it is that you just said, right? It's not ideal, but it's a good replacement. Now, this is more that restoration versus retribution. I doubt any teacher is going to say, I won't say I doubt any, most 99% of teachers are not trying to get back at students for being inappropriate or having inappropriate behaviors or saying inappropriate things or fighting. However, that's what it feels like a lot of times to our students. We tend to approach this as they did this behavior and now I have to punish them for that behavior. And so it becomes very like they get removed from the classroom. They might get detention. They might be writing lines. They might not be allowed to go to a field trip. They might be humiliated because they're called out in class. They might be yelled at. They might be excluded. And that feels a lot of times to our students is, I don't like this. This is very hard. No one's helping me. My teachers don't like me. My teachers are unfair. And then they're less motivated to engage in classroom. So when we've developed that office discipline referral and we're looking through potential consequences, I really challenge you to think about not retribution and punishment, but restoration. What happened and what needs to happen to repair the harm? So how do I ensure that the student takes responsibility for their behavior and how it affects others? How do I have the student understand and be a part of the process of, this is what happened. What are we going to do next time that's different? How do we learn from this behavior? How do we as staff maybe take a step back and look at what happened? What do we do next? And say, Rachel, you came off camera. Do you have anything to add to that, or you just?
Oh, I just really like the restoration component of this. And I've seen a lot of success with students I've worked with in the past. And it made me think of one example, but I can share later. I just thought of this example and wanted to share if you have a second.
I do. Please share.
Sure. So I actually had a student who had significant behaviors, and one of her go-tos was trashing our room, right? She would just go around and throw everything on the floor, rip down the poster boards. I mean, it was extensive. So she actually did this one day when I was actually out. So she trashed the room when my sub was there. I think she ended up getting, I don't know if she got suspended, I can't remember. But when I came back, we had a conversation about it. And it was more of just like I explained why I was sad for her and the students because look how the room looked. And so she helped me fix the posters. Like she helped me repair. I mean, obviously I cleaned up the bulk of it, but she did help me do some of the repairing and she never trashed my room again. I mean, it fixed the behavior long term. And so I think she really connected with that. So I do feel like there's a lot of value in this, and you have to get creative sometimes on what's an appropriate level for them to sort of help facilitate a way to restore.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that example because that's exactly what we're talking about. And it wasn't a look at the mess you made, so now you have to clean it up. It was a this this has really look at our classroom. Like this is what are we going to do about this? And you helped clean up with her, and it wasn't like a you have to do this, but a let's do this together and talk about what not to do next time and what to do.
Yeah, absolutely. It was very it was a positive experience, and then she got to have a little bit of input on what was on the board too. And so yeah, and I think it also improved our relationship. I don't want to say that because she was a new student to me, but it really built a relationship of trust because she also demonstrated other behaviors where she would get really aggressive with the teachers. And she never tried that with me because I feel like, she looked at how I was going to respond and it kind of shaped her behavior in that setting.
That's great. I've had similar experiences too, where it's like, let's do this together. The classroom, obviously, like restoring the classroom to what it was, but also like, hey, I think you really hurt your friend's feelings. Let's talk about what we can do with that. So there's a lot there. I will say the caveat to this is these are things that happen once everyone's calm and we're coming back together and processing. These are not things you're doing as part of the like de-escalation and we're all like that's just feeding the fire, continuing to talk about this is calm coming back and then how do we restore. So really encouraging that shift from retribution to restoration. um so suspension is something that is just a fact of life in education, right? There are laws that say we need to suspend, there are policies that say we need to suspend. Rarely is suspension going to change a behavior, however. And so, as much as possible, we want to keep kids in the classroom, in their learning environment, and use non exclusionary practices, especially for our kids who have, identified disabilities, either through a 504 or IDEA and special education. We need to be extremely cautious about suspension, but all students, suspension doesn't change the behavior necessarily. And so we have to think about alternatives. So part of it is that's restorative conversations, like the things we were just talking about, like what can we do to repair the harm that was done? Are there some apologies we can do, written or verbal here? Is there maybe a way to do like, especially at the elementary schools or even high school, if they're doing similar curriculum, buddy classrooms, not necessarily like I'm a buddy, so I'm now sitting, I go into the other classroom and I sit in the corner and I don't do anything, but we're still doing work, but we're removed from the environment that's maybe distracting us and causing some of those issues. Do we need to maybe do some restitution but overcorrection? Like if we're having trouble walking in line in the hallway, do we need to practice that behavior a few times? Again, not punitively, but because that's a behavior we need to practice and we need to practice it a whole lot. Do we need to do some reteaching? Do we need the students, especially older students? Hey, let's talk about what we would have done different, and let's maybe come up with how to teach our friends how to do it different, and how to what would we advise other people to do? And students coming up with kind of lessons and presentations about what happened and how they might do it differently, or how they advise their friends to do it differently. social skills lessons, if it is that, some conflict resolution training. So teaching students about, hey, I understand you were in a tough situation and that was a conflict and you responded by hitting. What are some other ways we can respond to conflict, right? And going through some training with them. Targeted mentoring, is there someone that maybe is a better match for this student that they can build that relationship with and use that? Are there maybe some mental health concerns that we need to refer to an outside agency or involve some more counseling support within the school? Are we at the point of, alternative programming or youth court or some of these other like Saturday morning behavior programs, things that maybe are alternative to suspensions, but still pretty significant responses to a behavior. So like a Saturday morning behavior program would be, instead of suspension, you're going to come in on Saturday and basically do like a detention or that kind of thing. Not always feasible with schools and sports and staffing and those things, but I've seen it done in urban schools and be very effective. And then if a student is suspended, it's really important that we have systems that, one, anything they miss academically, they're completing it. So suspension does not get you out of work. You still have to complete all work. And when you do come back, that there's a staff member to greet you at the door to say, welcome back to class. I know you had a hard time. Let's talk about what we're going to do different. And it's not I hope you learned your lesson. It's all right, you got suspended. That was a problem. We're restarting. What do we need to do? And then that's why you might have those conversations about replacement skills, restoring the environment, apologies, those things. When the punishment's over, now we come back and then we start having the proactive, positive conversations. I will say again, so many times teachers are like, I don't know, they're suspended. I don't know when they're coming back. And then they just show back up in their classroom, right? We don't really prepare for that. So with those office discipline referrals, we can look at that from a systems level of when are the behaviors occurring, how often are they occurring, which staff members are they occurring. For the individual student, we can look at, is this student having issues continuously during this time of day? Are there things that are happening and kind of what's that pattern? We can also look at what consequences have worked and haven't worked in the past. And then when you are using those consequences, think about what patterns of behaviors, redirecting very consistently, offering choices to the student as much as possible, and allowing the student to take responsibility for their actions that's at a developmentally appropriate level for them. Takeaway is that we really want to restore relationships in the environment. So thinking about whenever there's a consequence that's being marked on that office discipline referral, how is that consequence affecting my relationship with that student and affecting the environment? And are we doing things to improve those, or is it harming that? And if truly, honestly, sometimes the relationship's not good between the teacher and the student because of constant problems. So who can I bring in to have a good relationship with this student? Because we want all students to have at least one, hopefully more, but at least one trusted adult in that environment that they do have a good relationship with. So kind of key takeaways here from this whole thing, and then I will have any questions or follow-ups, but responding to problem behavior should not be decided in the moment. So if your teachers, if you threw out a situation like, what happens if a student turns in work late and they have no idea how they would respond? That's a problem, right? We want to have that set ahead of time. If you have a student who curses at you, how would you respond? We want our teachers to have pretty consistent responses. And so that might be the first step for you all, is thinking through, do we have consistency? And we should have a plan that hopefully minimizes conflict, incorporates some sort of instruction, and is restorative in nature. And the key to these is making sure that we have a documentation through our office discipline referrals, as well as that restorative or corrective consequence flow chart. And that's really the key to making sure that our responses are consistent within schools. So I will, like I said, I will make sure to share kind of some examples of those flow charts as well as the office discipline referrals with you all. But feel free to reach out to me. My email is sarah.house@okstate.edu. Happy to talk about this stuff at any point in time. And I know you guys have a lot of resources too, but I just want to make sure I'm here for you as much as you need. So I will stop. Any questions or follow-up with that?
Wait a couple of moments to see if there are any questions. I just want to thank Dr. Rich for coming and joining us today. ODRs, we talk a lot about, especially in MTSS, about our collecting our data and our screeners. And I know it's a conversation that schools ask, what can we use? How can we collect data? And what can we use as a screener? And ODRs is that. So I appreciate you diving into that a little bit more and explaining that in depth to some of our districts. We are going to have, yes, it is a good start. Thank you for starting the implementation of behavior. Absolutely. It's one of the first steps. We are going to have 2 behavior community of practices over the summer. One is going to be on designing school-wide expectations. And the second is going to be on school acknowledgement systems that promote positive behavior. So I hope that you will watch for those. Registration is not open yet, but it will be soon. We have a couple of more people typing, so I'm going to wait for just a second.
Yeah, and I'll respond to the question from Laura, and that's a great question. I'm assuming you mean kind of in general, but I'll respond specifically to office discipline referrals on like it can be very overwhelming and streamlined. A lot of times I tell districts if you start with sort of those major or administrator things that people can get more consistent on that piece, which I think can be helpful, and then start adding in the classroom managed ones can help with buy-in. And I think the administrators tend to be a little more on board with, yeah, let me figure out what comes to my office versus not. So that can be like a good starting place for it. But yeah, there is a lot to do. And I just say, it's step by step and piece by piece, and it takes years to develop.
And like most things with MTSS, it's that proactive thinking about things before they happen. So when we start looking at specifically behaviors in those major and minors, it can be a little overwhelming on having to, especially with the definitions of things, when you're having to really talk about it and really pin it down. But doing that work ahead of time is going to, alleviate a lot of that stress in the moment. I see Dr. Shepard has joined us. She's been on the
Thank
whole
you.
time, but now I see her.
Yes,
Welcome.
sorry, my mic and camera were disabled. So, but I did want to just chime in and tell Sarah, thank you for presenting today and for all of the examples and just real life application.
We have been asked if there's a conference for PBIS that we recommend. We definitely recommend the MTSS Summer Conference. There's going to be several workshops on these subjects at that at that event. It is going to be in June, June 24th through 26th. I believe it's going to be at the Reed Center. Dr. Shepard will be joining us there, doing some presentations. So that is the first one that I can think of. Dr. Shepard, do you have any recommendations?
That one, and also at the end of July, the Spark conference, which is also part of the special education conference. That's the last week in July. And so I think both of those will provide a lot of this information, not necessarily specific to PBIS, but in very applicable to MTSS and how to set these systems up within your district.
And I'll add, I think I always recommend going to the local conferences because you're going to get local context in Oklahoma. If you do want national level, there's a PBIS conference in Chicago every fall, and you can just kind of search PBIS conference. And then there's a PBS, Association of Positive Behavior Supports, that's usually in the spring. Those are national conferences, much wider topics, but just if you want perspective outside Oklahoma.
And I will also say that these community of practices are aligned with our OSDE Connect course on developing system-wide behavioral implementation. So, of course, check out that course. It has resources available to you on that. Any other comments, Dr. Shepard or Dr. Rich? All right. Thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you over the summer. If you have any other questions, feel free to email us at the State Department. My email is wendy.hardwick at sde.ok.gov. I'll ask Benjamin to put that in the chat before we leave. Thank you
Yes.
so much.
And Benjamin will also be posting this recording if you want to share with other team members. And we also encourage you to look for our courses on OK Connect in regards to MTSS implementation.
All right, we'll see you this summer. Thank you.